In this week's episode of Studio Inter, we'll be reviewing the Champions League game against Barcelona, the Serie A match against Lazio. We'll be previewing the Genoa game, this week's Moggi, Moratti and Frog, and much, much more. Everything here on Studio Inter, only on sempreinter.com.
Ecco Perisic, 1-1, gioco di gambe, guadagna il fondo, il cross, Icardi, e gol, 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 Maurito il Mamba!
Sono i blocchi nell'area di rigore, arriva la palla, la prende Messino, che segna solo contro le romane, segna il gol del 3-2
per una vittoria eccezionale.
Benvenuti, bentornati to another edition of Studio Inter. I'm your host Nima Ruzzari, wishing everyone welcome to a new week and a new win and a kind of and also a loss, but we'll focus on the positive things. And here to go through all of that with me, I'm joined by the gentleman ultra himself, Mr. Richard Hall. Welcome.
Good evening, gentlemen. I think I'm going to keep coming on here if we keep winning in Serie A.
Yeah, you're our lucky charm this season. And we're also joined by the host of the Alex Donno Show, Mr. Alex Donno, all the way from Florida. How are you?
Hey guys, I'm great. Still have a pep in my step after that Lazio victory. That was awesome.
Indeed, it was. And we are also joined by sempreinter.com and serpents of inter.com's very own Will Beckman. Welcome, Will.
Good evening. I don't have a pep in my step because I have a bit of a cold, but I do have an Inter scarf sat right next to me, so I'm ready for the next hour.
That's awesome. And we're also very happy to be joined by an ESPN senior writer. He also writes for The Times, Corriere dello Sport. He's written 4 books. When you talk about Italian football in English, this man defines it pretty much. Welcome back to Studio Inter, Mr. Gabriele Marcotti.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be on.
It's good to have you on, especially after a win. You were on last year when we weren't going through a very good phase. So it's good to have you on when we're in a good place.
Yeah, not just a win, but a performance too. And I think for me, that's my biggest takeaway from last night.
Yeah, I mean, let's get into that because I'm kind of keen to hear your thoughts on how Inter have progressed. I mean, the start to the season was hardly ideal, but since then, 6 wins in a row in the Serie A, 2 wins in the Champions League. Why do you think Inter have managed to turn things around? What's the main reason?
Well, I mean, for me, the turning around, I tend to look at, for myself as I grow older, I tend to look at performances more than results. Just something I've come to believe because I think performances are a better indication of sort of future results. And I always think back to the season with Mancini when Inter was winning all those games, 1-0 and Handanovic was making all those saves and they were so lucky and people were saying, oh, but look, this is great. It's a sign of a great team that they win while playing badly. When they were top, I think in early November. And actually, no, that's not the sign of a good team to win while playing badly. It's just a sign of a team that's playing badly. And, when I saw a lot of ups and downs, like the Torino game, which I think might have been one of the last games that Inter didn't win. I thought that was a good performance marked by individual errors. That can happen. I look at the Spal game, for example, and I thought that was a bad performance where Inter were probably fortunate to take the 3 points. And what I look at in the Champions League, that win, goodness me, Handanovic could have gotten sent off. That was nothing to write home about, again, other than the result. But then against Milan and now, jumping over the Barcelona game, which obviously is a different kettle of fish, to the Lazio game, those are 2 really, really big wins and 2 really big performances. And that's something you can build on.
Will, did you have a question for Gab?
I did, yes. It's actually about the what happened after the game more than about the game itself. But I know this is something that Gab has spoken about on other podcasts in the past. Spalletti, he has a problem when it comes to talking to the press because, so I should just summarize for people who didn't see it last night. He came into the post-match interview and Bergui was really nice to him. He was saying, Luciano, you had a bit of a difficult start to the season, but now you're playing really well. And normal people at that point say, gee, thank you. This is great. We're playing. I really appreciate it from a legend like you. But Spalletti doesn't do that. He says, what? Hold on a minute. A week ago, you said we were playing really badly. And now you're saying this. What's wrong with you? And he just kind of creates this really weird sort of conflict that seems to be getting bigger and bigger throughout the year. He's got a real bee in his bonnet this year. And I just wanted to ask, is this actually a problem? Could this derail us if it keeps happening? Or can I just keep laughing at it? Because it is quite amusing seeing him sort of get these compliments and then turn them into these massive arguments.
I mean, like, you hit it on the head. This is something, and Spalletti wasn't like this earlier in his career. When he was at Roma the first time around, he's a very, very cerebral guy, and, he had a bit of pride about him, but he could be tiny bit prickly sometimes. I think all of this happened when he went to Zenit. In fact, I spoke to somebody who worked with him at Roma, in fact, on both occasions. And he said they were like two different people. And he sort of described, he went to see Spalletti when he was in St. Petersburg. And, he sort of compared him to, if you guys remember, maybe from school, Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where sort of, Mr. Kurtz sort of goes down the river with the natives, and then he ends up going insane. They treat him like a god, and it's a little, or indeed Apocalypse Now. It's a little bit like this. I mean, we saw it. Well, we saw it in Rome. We saw it last year too. Remember that whole absurd back and forth that he had with Sarri, which was totally unnecessary, and the two were needling each other. I mean, I don't think it's a good look for him. From what I understand about Inter, it's not affecting the players because one thing, and we have to give Spalletti credit for this, I think, is when things go badly, he hasn't thrown the players under the bus. He hasn't complained about signings. Now, some might say it's because he got the players he wanted. He has his fixations, like every other manager, and he's a bit eccentric. But it seems to me like, he's kind of reserving his outbursts for the media or ex-pros who turn pundits.
I have a question on that because I've been thinking about this because I've looked at it from a different perspective, and that's the fact that Inter's history and Inter's role in Italian football always being the underdogs, so to speak, and always feeling that Juventus and Milan have kind of kicked them out to the side, and Inter have always been marginalized by these two other clubs. I think that in any other club, that behavior by Spalletti would be a reason that would be disruptive. Whilst at Inter, when you look at someone throughout Inter's history, if you look at someone like Trapattoni, if you look at someone like Mourinho, they create these, as Will says, these arguments, but that falls well at Inter. Because it's the culture of the club and also the group and that dressing room and that everything that shapes that club, that actually is something that they use as to galvanize themselves. That's my take on it. Do you agree?
It's possible. What I would say is obviously, if you speak to people from Roma, they'll tell you that, boy, if they think they've been marginalized, what about us? Obviously, look, creating the whole siege mentality, us against the world thing, that's coaching 101, right? Mourinho tries to do it, even though he's Mourinho even tries to do it when he's managing Manchester United and Real Madrid. Some people are just built that way. I don't know if it's just that. I just think he takes a lot of stuff personally, because it's often not about the team. It's often, I find, about tactical decisions, about himself. Look, he's an unconventional man, and I just think, you got to take it as a quirk. And like I said, as long as it's not affecting the players, as long as he's not falling out with them, then you live with it.
Richard?
What was that Sorry, I was going to say, what was that quote that Sabatini had about him last year? He said he was madness's neighbour or something. That was it was quite a good line.
Right, Richard.
Hi, Gab. How's it going? I've
you-
also got a question just a bit off the field rather than on it on this one. There's still rumours that ex-Juventus director Beppe Marotta has agreed to become Inter's new general manager. Nima just made a point then, which we've always talked on here, and I think it's fairly obvious in the fact that, Inter are, and most clubs in Serie A, if not all of them, are the long way behind Juventus. Do you feel that if this came to fruition and Beppe Marotta had a role at Inter, that it would help them take the next step to continue on the project in a better format than they have been doing? Or do you think that, as with many that have come before him, Inter may just affect Beppe Marotta, or you may also think that he's perhaps past his sell-by date in some respects?
I don't think he's past his sell-by date at all. I think that's just one of the stupid things, along with many other stupid things that Andrea Agnelli, occasionally says, or quite often says. It was like his excuse to get rid of him. I mean, I think the real reason he left, or a big part of the reason, as you guys might know, or might have heard, he wasn't on board with the signing of Cristiano. He thinks that the Juventus won't be able to afford him over the long run, and he's uncomfortable with the fact that they need to make a ton of money in player trading or plusvalenza, as we call them in Italy, every season. He doesn't think that's healthy. He preferred a more organic growth. It's funny with Marotta because I have a friend who's a big Atalanta fan, and he absolutely hates Marotta from his time there because he blew it. It's like basically the club's entire budget for 3 years on 2 horrendous signings, both of them from Milan, Comandini and Saudati. So it became like a running joke. But you look at what he's done in the last, 7 years at Juve, and that's pretty impressive. And it's not just the victories on the pitch. It's also, keeping a lid on Conte and getting the best out of him when he was with Conte. I think he's operated really, really well. If it means that, he keeps Mr. Ausilio away from the transfer market, I think that's a bonus. I think when you look at, some of the people who've cycled through Inter, and Inter have had a huge turnover of club officials and people at the top. Though weirdly, Ausilio's still there. I think if Marotta can bring some stability, I think that's good, right? I mean, Inter gone through Bolingbrook. I mean, even freaking Fassone was there, which still kind of gives me the creeps when I think about it. So I think we need to be clear too, though, that the guy's not a miracle man, right? Inter are still slightly hamstrung by what they can do. Financial fair play hasn't gone away. The commercial improvements, I think they've done a really good job there. One story that I thought was hugely underreported at the time, back in January, when this is going to sound boring if you're not into numbers in finance, but I think it's important. You remember when Inter issued that bond to raise money?
Yeah.
So I have a good friend here who's a hedge fund manager, and he was offered that bond, and he called me and he says, like, oh, this is nonsense. Who the hell's going to go and spend money on this? It's football. It's rubbish, blah, blah, blah. And it didn't even, have like a very high, even pay a very high rate. And then he called me like a couple of days later and he says, dude, this is absolutely insane. I think they were twice oversubscribed. It was an absolute rip-roaring success. And what that means is, well, A, Inter got a ton of money in at a relatively cheap rate, which is good for the club. But then it means, B, that, either they hire the very best fit people in the world to go and sell it, or, serious people looked at it and said, you know what, this is worth our time. This is worth our money. There's a ton of potential there. And so I think, there was actually a lot of good work that's maybe not exciting to many, but which is important to the club, that was happening behind the scenes. And, and hopefully Marotta can take it to another level. But, I also don't think you can expect miracles from him, because he is one guy.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're still saying he probably will work alongside Alessandro Antonelli as well. Antonello, sorry. So, hopefully, let's see what happens. But it's a good point, because I don't think he can do it perhaps all on his own.
Did I notice that you're not a big Ausilio fan there, Gab?
No, I'm not. I mean, look, I met the guy once, perfectly nice man. But I also think, Inter signings over, since he's been there and been involved, which is however many X years, I think they pretty much speak for themselves, and you can pass the buck. And look, not that before, when it was Branca and whatever, that things were much better, but at times they were. And the I just go back to the Gabigol Joe Mario, and I ask myself, in a normal industry, a boss goes and says, you know what, you tried your best, now let's go and give somebody else a chance. And look, and maybe that's what they did with Sabatini last year, and it was more a question of, but look, Ausilio's such a nice man, let's give him, let's just shift him horizontally somewhere else. But
if you look at, this defensive lineup now with Skriniar, De Vrij, Asamoah, and Versalco that he's put together for basically peanuts, that's pretty good, isn't it?
I'm not a Versalco guy.
Okay.
The Croatia don't get to the World Cup final. I don't know that this guy, we think of him in the same way we do. Asamoah and De Vrij on freeze, sure. I like that. But equally, you got to ask the question, free transfers generally aren't free. They come with big, enormous, whopping contracts and big commissions that you got to take care of.
Yeah, that's true.
De Vrij looked very well in he looked great in a certain system at Lazio, and he's a good player. And if the alternative is going and wasting 30 million on somebody's recommendation for some other Brazilian dud or whatever, then yeah, sure, I'll take De Vrij. But I don't put it this way. I don't think signing Asamoah from Juventus or De Vrij from Lazio, when these guys are free agents and their agents are going around knocking on the doors of every single club, I don't think that that's necessarily transfer genius there.
Okay. Alex, do you have a question?
Yeah, and to build on that, the one summer signing that I was most critical of personally was that of Keita Balde. I'm curious to your thoughts. First of all, one of the versions that we heard through the press, and I know that there's a lot of information that comes out during transfer time, much of it may not be true, but one of the versions was that they essentially passed up on Vidal for Balde in order to hold that final non-EU spot for Balde. Is that the version that you understand to be true? And I'd like to hear your thoughts overall on Keita Balde, and if you see him maybe gaining some serious form soon.
So more broadly, what I heard about Keita Balde is that he's a player that Spalletti specifically requested. They obviously had different alternatives. There was some talk too about, what sort of backup do you get for Icardi, because you want somebody who can come in and be an alternative to him, but also isn't going to cast shade on him, right? You don't want to go and spend big sums of money for a guy who's just going to sit on his bench on the bench because Spalletti's not going to play two strikers. So obviously that was something that played on their minds, and because Keita Balde can, he's not a traditional center forward, but he can play up front and has done so with some success, even on his own. And of course he can play on the wing. That was the appeal of Balde. That Keita was somebody who Spalletti thought had a big upside. He'd obviously been in Italy before, and the thinking was that he can cover different roles, and he's also, this surprised me a little bit, he's also somebody who deals with the bench very well. Some people even say too well. So I think he saw him as a good kind of squad addition.
That's pretty cool. I have a. I just wanted to pick your brain a little bit regarding the Barcelona game. Um, I mean, Inter. There was no doubt that Barcelona were better than Inter throughout the whole match, but I was surprised at how well Inter managed to stand up against Barca defensively, especially. What are your thoughts going into about that game?
Well, it's a weird one with Barcelona, right? Because so right now we think, oh wow, what a team! You know, they just ripped Real Madrid to shreds in the Clasico 5-1. But equally, if those of us who watched Barcelona play Seville, which was their last game before the Inter game, um, you know, we saw Barcelona that was outstanding while Messi was on the pitch, and then went off, and then, you know, this is no exaggeration, could easily have given up 4 or 5 goals in the second half. Marc-Andre Ter Stegen probably turned in the best goalkeeping performance of any keeper I've seen this season. Defensively, they were all over the place. Without Messi, they were just completely lost. And look, when Messi's not there, you become a lot less threatening. Um, it's not rocket science, right? And you know, if Messi were out for 6 months, he'd probably come up with some other way of playing that might work, but because he's coming back in 3 weeks, in some ways he's like, all right, let's not tinker too much. Let's just add bodies to the midfield, hold the ball, and hope that Suarez regains his scoring mojo. You know, Suarez had scored 2 goals from open play since the start of the season. Before that game. So I thought there were actually reasons going into it. I thought, my God, Inter can do this. But Suarez reminded us that he can also pass the ball a little bit, as we know. And I think the other big thing was, I just didn't think Inter were just emotionally drained from the derby. I don't think it was physical. I think it was mental. And I think that is something that, you know, as Inter grow or try to grow, you know, that's going to be one of the next big leaps, one of the next big transitions. You know, you see the super clubs in Europe, and you know, you look at Manchester City. You know, they play a huge game, they play another huge game in midweek, and it's the exact same level. You know, there's no drop off in intensity. You know, maybe some fatigue in some positions. You know, whereas with Inter, it's kind of like, ooh, we shot our load here against Milan. You know, now what do we do? You know, and look, I think it might also be an Italian thing, because if you look at Juve's performances, you know, sandwiches are nothing to write home about.
Yeah. I just wanted to, before we let you go, Gab, I wanted to ask you if you could give us like your top 6 in the Serie A and who will be capocannoniere.
Oh God, I hate predictions.
Well,
You're really gonna make me do this?
Yeah, I'm gonna do this. Everyone who comes on the show does it, so it would be unfair. Top 6. Who wins? Juve. I mean, obviously Juve wins. I mean, we can all agree on that, right?
So I've picked against Juve each of the
Okay.
last 5 seasons, and of course they always won the title. So this year I'm purposely picking Juve. Exactly.
That's great. I can live with that. I think most of the people listening to this can too. So Juventus in first. Who you got second?
Second, again, at the start of the season, these are not the names I had at the start of the season, but at the start of the season, I would have had Milan. Serves me right. So now, no, I'm going to go with Napoli in second place, partly because I don't think they're going to get out of the Champions League group, and you know, I think they can use the depth, and I think they can really give them a run for the money. I've got Inter third. No surprise there, I think. In fourth, I think it's really tight between Roma and Milan. And since you guys are all Inter fans, you'll appreciate this. I had a conversation with somebody who's a financial fair play guy, and basically he says, if the worst, you'll like this, the worst case scenario for Milan is they don't finish in the top four, and then as a result, and Higuain drops off, and they send Higuain back to Juve. That is a surefire way to go and mess up both Milan and Juventus in one fell swoop, because Higuain goes back to their books, then it's bye-bye Dybala or bye-bye Pjanic. Now, he might have been exaggerating, but those Higuain numbers are just absolutely insane. So I've got Roma, Milan 4th and 5th, and I have Lazio 6th. In fact, I might even go Fiorentina 6. Again, Milinkovic-Savic looks like somebody else this season. Luis Alberto's obviously had his issues. I think Inzaghi's been kind of smoke and mirrors until now, although he's definitely the more clever of the two brothers. So yeah, I'll go with Fiorentina.
Nice one. Who'll be capocannoniere? Is it Ronaldo, Icardi, or can Piontek surprise everyone?
Piontek, come on. Called regression to the mean. I have Icardi as capocannoniere. Again, no disrespect to Cristiano, but I even feel a little more confident about it now at this stage. I just think the way, he scored 44 goals in all competitions last season, right? And I think it was 27, 28 in La Liga. And that's on a team that, and look, and La Liga is different from Serie A, because even when you play the really bad teams in Serie A, as we know, not only can they make it very difficult for you to score, but in Italy, we don't run up the score. It's considered bad form. We tend to stop at 3, maybe 4. And Ronaldo scored a lot of garbage time goals. I mean, he scored a lot of hugely important goals, but he scored a lot of goals, or certainly felt like, when it was like, they're like 4-0 up against Eibar, and then look, he scores a hat trick in the last 5 minutes. Way, that doesn't happen in Italy. Like, I genuinely think, if Juve are 2-0 up, they're not going to try to score more. No matter how much Cristiano shouts and demands the ball. Like, I could see Chiellini at the back telling him, "Yo, calm down. We don't do this." So, but even without that, look, 28 goals. How many did Icardi have last season? 29?
Yeah.
Is that? So, that's the ballpark. And if we assume he's going to score a little bit less for the reasons that we said, and Icardi repeats the season that he had last year, which I think is eminently possible, why not Icardi?
Nice one. You'll definitely be popular by the listeners by saying that.
No, I don't know. I'm really bad at these predictions too, as you know, from the fact that I picked somebody other than Juve for 5 straight years. So
it's the Higuain going back to Juve prediction that we need you to get.
Yeah,
that's the one.
Yeah, that's that. If nothing else matters, unless if you get that one right.
No, but seriously, guys, on that point, Milan are facing that they obviously will get a punishment, right, from UEFA's financial control body because of the breach and all the chaos that happened last year. They've obviously breached again this year. That means that best case scenario, they'll get the punishment, and then they'll have to either get a voluntary agreement, but more likely they'll need to get a settlement agreement, which means that they'll have more restrictions if they want to play in Europe. I don't see how they can afford to keep Higuain, or even why they would want to. I mean, they're paying him 16 million. They're paying a 16 million euro a year loan fee, plus they're paying his wages, which I think in gross terms are something like 12 million euros a year. That's 28 million euros a season on one player, wonderful center forward, but that's just an absurd, idiotic amount of money to be spending on one guy. And those guys at Elliott, those guys are bean counters. They're going to say, wait a minute, we could go and spend 100 million on somebody, pay them 10 million a year, sign him to a 5-year deal, and they'd be younger, and they would cost us less than Higuain, of course, and have resale value, and he'd actually be our player and not Juventus's player. So put those things together, and there's no question to me what they're going to do. That unless he scores 30 goals or something, I think he's going. I think he's going back.
That would be interesting. That would definitely be interesting. Right, Gab, if people want to follow you, it's at Marcotti on Twitter. Do you have anything like special coming up now that people should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I wrote a piece on it should drop tonight on Tuesday night for ESPN about the situation at Real Madrid and Santi Solari, former Interstar, and Santi Solari, of course, and that weird sort of 2-week interim contract he has, and the chaos at the club. But you guys can keep reading me at ESPN, listen to the Game podcast, which I host for the Times twice a week, my columns in the Times on Mondays, and hit me up on Twitter. I'm around.
Thank you so much for coming on. As always, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Gab.
Thanks, Gab.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye. Right. Let's move on. I'm kind of keen to hear, Richard, your thoughts on the Lazio game, because I was not expecting that at all.
No, it was something else, wasn't it? It was. It's a good feeling. I mean, Gab mentioned about performances then, and we got one, a real performance. I mean, I certainly thought after, when you saw that, potentially the game's going to get called off, it was absolutely awful conditions. Lazio, even though we've had good luck there and the last 2 games we've been there, I still thought it always feels like it's going to be a tough game. And then there's none of the ex-Lazio players are starting. De Vrij seemed an odd one. Obviously, Candreva is understandable. But then he starts João Mario, and you're thinking, okay, it's really raining now. But then what was interesting for me, and probably the biggest point that I was really pleased with, is that I mentioned on the previous one of the previous pods that when Reggie Nyangla went off and Boyar Valero came on, I think we really lost a huge part of what we've been one of our just a huge just the way and the speed, the power and the intensity of the way we played. And against Barcelona, I thought that Boyar Valero was just not his fault again. I don't dislike the man, but he was just outclassed and it didn't work there. What was interesting in this was that João Mario didn't play in that sort of trequartista role that we thought he might do. And he's sort of floating out onto the left all the time. And it sort of became this sort of 4-3-3 at times, and the players were a bit more interchangeable. And that really helped us. And that was only part of the reason. There was some brilliant individual performances as well. And Mauro Icardi just is continually impresses. So it was a really interesting performance. And for me, I thought it was excellent. They didn't really give up at all. They just continued to work. And in the end, it was fantastic. So yeah, I was really buoyed up by that. And hopefully now we know the levels of what that performance is. And probably the best 90 minutes we've seen this season, potentially.
I was so impressed. For me, particularly, what really, really caught my eye was the fact that Spalletti went, shocked everyone by playing João Mario and playing a 4-3-3, kind of, in the sense that João Mario naturally falls much deeper when he plays. And how that, João Mario together with Brozovic and Vecino, completely dominated the match yesterday in midfield, and that's something that we haven't seen Inter do for quite some time, and I found that really, really interesting. And although João Mario had an excellent first half, I mean, he's barely played this season, so it's only natural he got tired. And then to bring Borja Valero on there, I mean, for me, this was a Spalletti tactical win. What do you think, Will?
Well, I mean, it's the kind of performance that tells you a lot of things. The Italians are obsessed with this idea of a salto di qualità. That kind of making a leap up to the next level as a team. And I think this was the kind of game that made him to do that. I didn't expect us to win 3-0. I thought there might be a bit of a hangover from the Barcelona and the derby. There wasn't, absolutely not.
Not even close, not even a scintilla of a hangover. It was
neanche
full
uno
dominance.
scintilla. No, it was
nothing.
It was pretty special. And what was pleasing is that, as you said, there was the performance. If you look at Inter's results this season, this was our 9th win of the season. But if you look at the 8 wins we'd had before, 6 of them had been by 1 goal. 1 of them had been by 2 goals, which was the Cagliari game. That was 1-0 until the 89th minute, and then you had the Bologna game. So, we've been kind of grinding and nicking and seeing out wins by hook or by crook. This was just an annihilation from start to finish. It was just a team that was better than another team, and to do that away from home, that was pretty special. And if you compare that performance to that infamous match last season in May, when really we were outclassed, or we weren't in it for 70 minutes, and then something happened at the end. The difference is remarkable. And I think this team is actually, you can see it getting better, which is what is so encouraging. I think the physical, there's also a physical aspect. Spalletti had to be a bit more cautious at the start of the season, because unlike last season, there are a lot of games this year, so he probably couldn't be as aggressive with his pre-season training. That's what certain people have suggested. But yeah, to do that with that Nainggolan was really impressive, because we kind of thought, he's kind of the key man here, and what's going to happen? Who are we going to play? And we won 3-0 with João Mario on the pitch. So, pretty special. I'm just looking for a tweet that sums up my thoughts on Icardi. It was from Fabrizio Biasin, who's normally quite good with things on Inter. He said, here we go, he said, last night people told me that Inter could have a problem because they're too Icardi reliant. These are the same people that a month ago told me that Icardi was a problem because he didn't help the team out enough. My suggestion is that you go and take care of your own problems because they're serious. In other words, stop making Icardi a problem. Perhaps the problem is yourself. That third goal was great, wasn't it? It was like a sort of see you later type.
Yeah. That pass by Borja Valero, that whole move. Alex, I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the Lazio game, because you were pumped up yesterday when we were messaging.
I was so pumped up. And here's a funny thing about the whole João Mario thing, because when the starting 11 was announced, I happened to be making my very long commute to work. I was in the car. Of course, I wasn't on Twitter or anything like that, so I had no idea. I get to my work, and I turn the game on. I think it's the 5th or 6th minute at the time I turned it on, and I just see him there on the pitch, and it was surreal. But I'm so glad I hadn't seen the starting 11 announcement beforehand. I would have had a panic attack, right? Seeing João Mario in the starting 11, it would not have been good for my heart rate at that point. So seeing him on the pitch actually playing pretty well, like you said, Nima, until his legs just ran out in the second half. He was dog tired because he's not played any meaningful football. Huge positive for me. I tend to root for redemption stories, right? There are some fans that will see a guy like Mario, given the issues he had last season at Inter and the loan, not wanting to come back. A lot of people will write him off. Oh, I hope he dies. I never want to see him perform again. I actually hope he becomes an amazing redemption story to the point where he can help this team as much as possible. Maybe that leads to a big sale in January or in the summer. Then it's a win-win for the club. But, and some of the other things you guys are saying, the feed from Borja Valero to Icardi on the second goal was absolutely masterful. I enjoyed, of course, Icardi's performance was great. Brozovic, another masterclass. But at this point, it's something hardly even worth bringing up because that's become the consistent level of play for him. I also look at the post-match comments by Spalletti. It's funny because we're all sitting here talking about how it was a great performance for 90 minutes. If you talk to Luciano, the first thing he brought up was how poor the second half was, and it was brutal. It really feeds into what Will and Gab were talking about, the us against the world mentality, and how Spalletti, I think, really can be critical when it's appropriate, and he also doesn't want to heap praise when he doesn't find it appropriate. Because I think if Spalletti was talking to the media after the match and talking about how perfect of a 90-minute performance it was, he probably thinks if he says something like that, he's giving his players a little cause to relax. He's giving his players too much credit, and maybe they won't grind as hard in the next training session, and maybe they'll be a little bit mentally on vacation in the next match. So I certainly thought that was tactical because, listen, obviously Spalletti has a better idea of what his team should look like than any of us do, given he has a higher football IQ and he watches every training session and we don't. But it's hard to imagine him watching that second half and really thinking it was as much of a train wreck as he made it out to be. So I certainly think that those comments by him were made for a reason. They were made with purpose, and I doubt he really thought it was as bad as he said it was.
That's a good point. I'm just really for me, like what you said about Brozovic there. I've been thinking about this for quite some time now, and of all the players that I thought there was going to be that was going to do a salto di qualità, as as Will put it, Brozovic was not one of those players. I mean, I'd given up hope on him. I can admit that 100%. And now, as you said,
so it's San Siro.
Yeah, I was hardly alone. Although some people on Twitter would like to claim that they knew. They knew.
I mean, go back to January this year. Spalletti basically pulled him off a plane to Seville at 11 in the evening. He was going, and then a fortnight later, he was booed off at San Siro, and he applauded the crowd. I mean, this is like science fiction almost, the way that this is all changed around. And if he does the same with João Mario, then he deserves the freedom of the city, because he was gone. He said in June, I don't want to go back to Inter. I don't like it there. I don't like Serie A. I'm not motivated. Pretty much he said the Inter fans stink. I don't like anything. Let me go. And those comments obviously became a boomerang, because everyone went, oh, well, okay. So you've said that, so that means that we won't want to offer Inter more than 10p for you. And Inter said, no, all right, we'll keep him. So he had to stay. He became a prisoner of his own sort of desire to get away. So but Brozovic, let's go back to Brozovic. So that was a digression. Brozovic, no. I mean, even with that beard, he looks so imposing, doesn't he? He's just like a I don't know, like a stallion in midfield. And that goal was so good as well. Someone mentioned on Twitter last night that the way that he made sure that because the pitch was wet, he changed the way he shot it. He kept it. His IQ is just gone through the roof. I don't understand it. I mean, there must have been a lobotomy in March or something, because he's a different man.
He really is a different man, and I think it's got something to do with him becoming a father as well.
Ah, yes, that is a good point. Yes,
and we haven't even mentioned Brozovic going viral from the Barcelona game with his free kick block. So he's become internet famous as well.
He did it again yesterday, didn't he?
Yeah, did he yesterday?
Yes, he did.
The crocodile.
Coccodrillo.
Coccodrillo. Yeah. No, this guy he's somewhat becoming like kind of he's slowly becoming like a kind of a cult character. I mean, everything about him is just his facial expressions and that epic Brozo thing. And then I don't know, the guy he's a special one, and it's like he doesn't live in the same galaxy as everybody else, as we've said so many times. But as long as he performs like this, because then we're more than happy to put up with all the other nonsense, I guess. Right. Let's move on to let's go down at this time we usually go down memory lane. It's time for Interlegends with Mr. Critty Smith.
Non è un personaggio che può essere sostituito, perché era un personaggio assolutamente unico. Il fatto che abbia sempre pensato e avuto nel cuore due colori, il nero e l'azzurro.
Right, Critty. Who have you chosen this week?
I've chosen the original Ronaldo, not the Portuguese guy who likes to lift his shorts up to show us he has better quads than Triple H.
Okay, go for it.
Yeah, so when you're talking about Brazilian Ronaldo, especially his time at Inter, you have to understand that Inter were in a sort of a slump from the 1989 season onward after winning the Scudetto, and they were desperately trying to get back onto not only the Serie A championships title scene, but also in the European title scene, where they'd won a UEFA Cup, and in Ronaldo's first season they actually won the UEFA Cup as well, but that was even in those days was seen as a secondary tournament. It's prestigious, I guess, to a certain degree. But, if you're Schalke or somebody like that, maybe you consider that a huge win. But for a club, Inter, that had won European Cups, for someone of that level, it simply is not cutting the mustard. So they at the time in 1997, they spent a record transfer fee to get Ronaldo to come to the San Siro. So his first season doesn't disappoint. It's not just about his goals, but it's about the personality that he brought to Inter. A former teammate, Steve McManaman, said back in the day that he could go into a restaurant with just him and a teammate, and by the end of the time of them eating, they would have 20 or 30 people around the table. He was just so inviting, and he brought that personality and that I guess you'd say that everyone is watching style of football to the table. We can agree on one thing, if nothing else. He is probably unquestionably the greatest talent to ever play at Inter Milan, probably for any club he's ever appeared for. Maybe you can go down Real Madrid's line of great players and maybe you can find someone, but at Inter, as far as pure talent goes, as far as, coming into this world with that God-given ability, I don't think that anyone that we've ever seen wear the black and blue has ever come close to him. The issue with Ronaldo, of course, wasn't so much his playing ability. It was the lack of playing after suffering the devastating knee injury in the middle of his tenure at Inter. He missed a season and a half. An entire season was lost due to knee injury. And, that's going to be kind of the story when you look at why it's so painful to remember him. It's what he did after he left Inter when he went to Real Madrid and, was this pace-setting player who just, kind of reinvigorated that club and brought them to new heights. And, he was unable to win the Champions League with Real Madrid, but, at the same time, he became truly a legend with them. It's there that in 2002 in the World Cup, and this is post-Inter as well, and then, of course, the Real Madrid days is where he really cemented himself as one of the 100 greatest living players on the planet. So it's so painful because I said in the article, he's the greatest what if in Inter history. And if you look at what he should have done, I mean, when he played, he scored, but out of 170 appearances that he should have made for Inter, he didn't even make 70. I mean, that's he lost that many games to injury. So we'll never really know what could have been with Ronaldo in the Nerazzurri. It just doesn't. It's very painful to think back on because it has so many trophies that could have been associated with it, and nothing was ever done. And so Inter had to basically form a partnership they had in the middle of his tenure, decided to one up their transfer, the record transfer fee, and they brought in Christian Vieri and thought, well, if you can't have one, you can have them both, and sort of form this duo. And I will say in his last season, 2001-2002, Ronaldo did return at the very end of the season, scored a very, very short amount of time. He only played in the last 4 match days, and leading up to the final match day where Inter were in first place, he scored 4 goals, I believe, in 3 matches, critical to Inter's holding on to first place, only to see them drop to Lazio 4-2 on the final match day, which dropped them from first into third place. So, guys, it's up for discussion. We can talk, how you all remember Ronaldo, what your thoughts of him are as far as being the most talented player to ever play for Inter, and as well as, what are some of your greatest memories, and what are your thoughts on him as he ranks historically?
For me, he's not it's like when Mo says about Christian Vieri, that he doesn't, he has a problem with him being an Inter legend. I have the same problem, in fact, bigger, with Ronaldo, for the simple reason of how he left Inter, and for what you said, that he only played 70 games out of 170. He was one of the richest men in Italy that Moratti was pumping money to, wages to, and as soon as Inter nursed him back to health, he completely choked on the 5th of May 2002, and he's in perfect condition, goes into the World Cup, scores 8 goals, wins the World Cup, is basically back to full health after Inter have nursed him back through those 3-4 years, And then he goes out and says this thing that he says he wants to leave for Real Madrid. He only wants to join Real Madrid. He wants to leave Inter. He's not happy. And forces Inter to let him go for peanuts of what he's actually worth, of which Real Madrid never end up really paying them. And we have to chase them halfway through every arbitration sports court in the world before Inter eventually get paid. So, and then that's, think this isn't even me talking about when he joined Milan and scores for Milan and goes to the Curva and shushes them. So, no, this is, for me, yes, as a brand name, he took Inter to a whole other level. He brought so many new Interisti. But if you look at this guy, we're talking, I read someone calling him the greatest traitor in world football. This guy played for Real Madrid and Barcelona, Inter and Milan. He played for PSV. What next? Play for Feyenoord and Ajax, and he'd completed that. It's just, for me, it was a football mercenary, a fantastic football mercenary, but he only gave Inter a UEFA Cup win, and other than that, he only cost Inter loads of money, milked the club dry. For me, he's not a legend. Alex?
He is absolutely a mercenary, but in my mind and in my heart, he's absolutely an Inter legend. It's really hard for me to downplay the personal attachment I have to Ronaldo, even though there were very bitter feelings on my end towards the end of his Inter tenure. The frustration of getting him healthy, only to see him magically healthy anytime there was an international break. He was playing for Brazil, then he was always hobbling when it was time to play for Inter. But as far as what Ronaldo the early days especially meant to me was, I inherited my Inter fandom from my father, who grew up in Milano. I grew up in the United States, but so I've been an Inter fan since longer than I can remember. But Ronaldo was really one of the pieces when he arrived in '97 who really made me fall in love with that club and even fall in love with the sport more than I had been prior. Just a larger than life acquisition, and the talent that he displayed on the pitch. It to me, sometimes when I'm feeling down or feeling bored, I have nothing else to do, I'll watch some of the highlight compilations of the phenomenal goals from his tenure with Inter. So to me, it's hard to really downplay what he represented in that aspect. You remember the stories, during his time in the late '90s, how other players in the club would say sometimes at training sessions they would just stop to watch Ronaldo because the things he would do on the pitch were that impressive. Later in his tenure in Nima, you outlined a lot of those things. 5th of May, 2002, one of the most, bitter feelings I've had watching football in my entire life. And then, to have to then watch him win that 2002 World Cup with those bitter feelings that they had, it was a difficult pill to swallow. So I really have to take the good with the bad for Ronaldo. I think he's one of those players, even with that mercenary status, he's one of those types of players that, even though, he played for so many different clubs, he played for Inter and Milan, he played for Barcelona and Real Madrid. I guess with him being such a larger than life guy, I kind of feel like no one ever really owned Ronaldo. Like he wasn't somebody I can view and say he should have been an Inter player for life. I think with that personality and that career trajectory, I just think you have to, almost look at it like an Ibrahimovic type of guy, that he's going to play for so many different clubs. That's just sort of the life path that he chose. He wasn't a Javier Zanetti type. He was a guy who wanted to play for everyone and get glory in so many different countries and so many different clubs. But, overwhelmingly, my feelings on him are very positive, although I do understand the negatives you brought up there.
Richard, what are your thoughts on this?
I'm with you on this, Nima, I think. I get the point that the comparison to Ibrahimovic, because we talked about him the other week and said, he played for lots of different, the Juve and everything else with Milan. But I felt like he achieved and really did a lot for Inter. Whereas Ronaldo, I think he was under, he didn't do enough. I think he owed us more. I think that's the other thing as well, like you mentioned with the injury. For me, you think Paris, of course, against Lazio. But then if I think of that, I think Zanetti. I think of his debut and I think of Rekabo with those 2 ridiculous goals. So, I think maybe the memory's tarnished at the time. At the time, if I put myself right back in, what was I now? 17, 18 years old, when Ronaldo was playing and you're watching him week in, week out, and you look at that and you think, yeah, those memories were good then. But because of what happened since, I think I'm on your side of the fence with that one, Nima, because it does tarnish it. And I think from the amount of games he played as well, if he'd done this after 250 games and 171 goals or something like that, maybe a different story. But no, I think after everything they did, he owed us more.
Will, you got anything you want to add to this?
Well, I had the pleasure over the summer of going through hours and hours of YouTube footage from Serie A in the late 90s as part of a research project I was doing for someone else who was writing a book. Obviously, I was. I don't like stressing this point because you always get angry at me, but I'm a bit younger, so I didn't actually live through that sort of period. I was sort of. I didn't actually experience Ronaldo at Inter, so I don't have this sort of. I don't feel the burning anger of what he did and how it ended and everything. But it also meant that I hadn't really fully embraced what he did in that first season. Now, I'll say now I agree that it's a bit awkward to call him a legend because a legend encompasses many things, but he was the most talented player I think Inter have ever had, and probably the most talented player they will ever have. That first season was
it was amazing. It was unbelievable. It was unbelievable.
He was a Martian who had descended from another planet. He would embarrass players on a weekly basis. The speed of his dribbling and the way he would sort his feet out was mesmerizing. So, and I did a feature for Serpents of Madonnina about this time last year about professional footballers who support Inter. Bit of a shameless plug there. Still out there somewhere. Go have a look. But I was going through them, and the vast majority of players who spoke about their support for Inter basically said, "Yeah, Ronaldo." Like I remember one of them saying, you see the footage of the time of kids walking to the stadium with that ridiculous razor haircut, because that's what he did. He was just, he was just, I don't know, he was difficult to believe. And it's sad that it ended the way it did. The other memory I'd throw in is the season under Lippi when he was out for 6 months, came back for the Coppa Italia final, and then did his knee again within 5 minutes of coming on. That kind of sums what happened to him up at Inter. It was very disappointing to look through that footage, and you just think what could have been. Like I said, I don't really want to comment on what how it ended and all that. You've already covered that pretty comprehensively. But I just it's never a bad time to go on to YouTube and watch his videos, because he was one of I don't even know what the words are. It was unbelievable.
Yeah. Well, thanks a lot for this. Thanks a lot, Critty, for this week's Interlegend, and we'll be doing this next week again. Now it's time for the part of the show where we pay tribute, rip the piss out of, and criticize someone or something in the world of football heavily, starting with the positivity. This week's Moratti, which will be presented by Mr. Richard Hall.
He works a lot, he's intelligent, and he surprises people sometimes with his ideas. Not easy to find one person of this qualities.
Hi guys, right, yeah. You've actually stolen it already, but I have got a little second part to it. One of the things that when you're watching football now, just to be able to marvel at something you've never seen before, and that was what we were talking about Brozovic with those, he's moved the crocodile or whatever he wants to call it, with that, especially the one against Barcelona, which was absolutely ingenious, and it's so rare that you come away from a football match going, I haven't seen that. Yeah, and I just thought that was fantastic. But taking it on just a little bit more, it came to my attention when we were talking to Gab and to James the other week. These guys obviously know Italian football more than most. And I think what's just a nice pleasure after doing this podcast for so long is to hear people, not just like ourselves, but I'm talking about these guys coming on the pod and actually talking about Inter as second, third place. And I just think sometimes when we can be a little bit critical of certain things, it's sometimes just nice to sit back and go, actually, we've come a heck of a long way. And so when Gab said that today, I just thought that actually, yeah, it's a big change from where it was. And I thought it's nice to know that hopefully we're still on that upward trajectory.
If there was anyone who was disappointed or frustrated after last Wednesday's defeat in the Camp Nou, just remember that 2 years ago we were losing against Hapoel Beersheva having gone 2-0 up, or we were losing to Southampton having gone 1-0 up. We were going out of the Europa League in the group stages. You know, the trajectory that is great. So don't get your knickers in a twist about a slightly meek performance against Barcelona in which we were in the game with 7 minutes left.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, let's move on to something a little bit more comical. This week's Frog, which will be presented by Mr. Will Beckman.
È clamoroso! Autogol di Ranocchia!
Yeah, I feel almost slightly mean selecting this as the comic moment of the week, but I think it has to be poor Julen Lopetegui for the culmination of one of the worst 4 months I don't think a football manager could ever have, particularly a Spanish manager. You know, if you are Spanish and you are a coach, you'll probably want 2 jobs when you set out in your career. You'll want to manage Real Madrid, because Real Madrid are Real Madrid. They are one of the biggest clubs in the world, if not the biggest club. And you want to manage Spain. So the thought of managing both in the space of 4 months on paper is like the greatest glory anyone could ever experience. And unfortunately, dreams don't always come true. And you just wonder, he must sit in bed occasionally nowadays and just think, what if I'd said no? What if I'd just stayed with Spain? How could things have changed? You know, you talk about, you know, the Lazio Inter game from last year being sliding doors, and, you know, the Spurs game this year. Think about him. You know, he was 2 days away from leading the favourites into the World Cup, and he ended up not doing that, being humiliated, and then getting sacked 4 months later after the 5-1 defeat against, you know, Barcelona yesterday. And the sad thing is, really, it was kind of predictable. There were a lot of people when he was appointed by Real Madrid and was sacked by Spain that were saying, yeah, well, he's going to be out. He's going to be out in 3 months anyway. And it's just kind of sad how you sort of saw it happen. Like you knew what was coming, and he just couldn't stop it. You know, it was very sad. So I do feel sorry for him, but, you know, I think it has to be him this week.
The way this guy got screwed over by Real Madrid is quite remarkable. Yeah. I mean, they released the news, and he gets sacked. And he gets sacked by the Spanish national team like 2 days before the World Cup starts. and then he takes over Real Madrid, and they kick him to the curb before November. I mean, you talk about getting screwed over. I mean, this guy, it's he got screwed. Right, let's move on to something a little bit more negative. This week's Moggi, which will be presented by Mr. Alex Donno.
I had to dig very deep to find negativity based on my positivity of the way Inter performed on Monday. So I have 2 little ones here. Now, the first of these is essentially for Nima, because I think a lot of Interisti would hear this and probably think this is a huge positive. But I caught your excellent rant last week on your fears of, you know, the longer Gattuso is employed in Milan, how that could signal really the downfall of the style of play in the Milan derby, and how, you know, 3 consecutive matchups he's gone with just a very tough to watch conservative approach. I see comments today from Leonardo at Milan reaffirming his faith in Gattuso, talking about the rumors of him being sacked for Donadoni or Conti or whoever else being ridiculous, and also saying that, you know, Milanisti are too obsessed with the idea of Champions League qualification, and maybe they should lower their expectations a little bit. So upon hearing all of that, you know, and of course, sometimes
did he say that?
He did say that, and sometimes directors will say these things, and then, you know, 2 days later they sack the manager, and it doesn't really matter what they said. But I hear those comments, and it certainly makes me think that, you know, Nima's wishes of improving the managerial situation at Milan are not changing anytime soon. That's number one. Number 2 is, you know, we'll leave Italy for a moment. This kind of builds on what Will was saying about the dumpster fire that is Real Madrid. Their captain, Sergio Ramos, not exactly behaving like a captain. Of course, I'm sure every player on that side is embarrassed about their performance in El Clasico, dropping 5-1 to Barcelona. But, if you scroll through social media, you'll find that on Instagram, there is, I'm sure there are probably hundreds of these, but there's a fan account, for Sergio Ramos called Sergio Ramos Idol, who, had this Instagram post where he just ripped the piss out of every Real Madrid player except Sergio Ramos, noted how well Ramos played, but he said some pretty nasty things about, Thibaut Courtois on down, but Ramos played well. And of course, what does Sergio Ramos, the captain of Real Madrid, do? He likes that Instagram post. So, if I'm any of his teammates, I'm not feeling too good about that. And of course, he's really setting that tone for that locker room, guys.
Indeed.
Probably runs that account himself. Sergio Ramos.
Might be the burner account.
Either him or Mo Salah.
It wouldn't surprise me one bit. Right. Before we go, I just want to briefly touch on the Genoa game because we play on Saturday. Genoa have had a great start to the season, and despite that, they've decided to sack Ballardini and bring back Juric. I think between them, Juric and Ballardini have been the coaches of Genoa for the past 10 years. If you add in Gasperini.
And Gasperini, yeah.
And Gasperini. Those three have been coaching Genoa. It's like they have this kind of like rota system where you do it from April to November. I'll take over.
They're on shifts.
They're on shifts, exactly. So it doesn't really matter how good things go for Genoa. It's those three that run it. So, but having said that, they've got a really, really interesting team, a young team. They have, and they've caused teams some problems. They drew with Juventus away, and they've got that Piontek fella, who some people say is just having a kind of a lucky season so far. But either way, this to me is the typical kind of Inter trap, isn't it? Like brilliant performance against Lazio, decent against Barcelona, and we're just waiting to walk all over Genoa at home in front of 60,000 at the San Siro, and it's a 0-0 draw. I mean, that's my only fears. But joking aside, I think this is what we saw against Lazio was things clicking into place, and if things click into place, then I think Inter. I can only see 3 points here, honestly. And with Mauro Icardi playing the way he's playing, I'm thinking 2-3 goals by this guy because he looks unstoppable. The guy's addicted to scoring goals, and his addiction is he's falling off the wagon pretty quickly. So what do you think, Alex? Just a quick prediction.
Yeah, well, I mean, on Piontek, it seems he's been a little quiet lately, so maybe he is regressing to the mean, like Gab mentioned. Like you, Nima, I find it hard to imagine. Obviously, Pazze Inter is always the specter hanging over our shoulders. I find it hard to imagine anything less than 3 points in this matchup, and I think why I'm so confident in that is that lately you've had a nice run of clean sheets in Serie A, and the defensively they've really stepped up, and it hasn't even seemed to matter over the last couple of matches if it's Miranda or if it's De Vrij in the back. Miranda put in a vintage performance, against Lazio, so I'm getting a little bit more confidence that his form is really picking up this season. And the big run of late stoppage time goals that Inter has had have shown a lot of character this season. So. It's just hard after the Lazio performance to think that this isn't a sign of positive momentum building. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be a 2-0 victory at home for Inter. I'm feeling relatively good about that at this moment.
Will?
Yeah, 2-0 seems realistic. Obviously, Genoa are playing in midweek. They're playing at San Siro, funnily enough. They're playing Milan in the game they should have been playing about 2 months ago when it was postponed because of the tragedy with the bridge in Genoa. So they're going to be a little bit tired. I suggest if they want to get points at San Siro, they do it in midweek and not at the weekend. But yeah, I mean, I see what you mean about sort of this is the classic Inter banana skin nonsense cluster bleep. But
yeah, exactly.
But I just think with each week with the passes, you kind of feel that less about this team. You kind of think, they're actually not Pazze Inter anymore. Because it's not a good thing, is it? It's not. No. It's like, that's the weakness. So I would say 2-0. Actually, no, I'm going to say 2-1. Because we have to remember that Nima's footballing idol plays for Genoa in midfield. So he's going to score.
Daniel Bessa. Daniel
he's an ex-Inter star as well, so he'll score, but Icardi and Vecino will get the goals. Actually, no, Vecino and Lautaro, because I wouldn't be surprised if Icardi sat this one out, because Spalletti does. He left him out in the home game against Cagliari a few weeks ago, so that could happen.
That would literally be the ideal solution. Bessa gets a goal and shows everyone why Inter should buy him back in the summer. But Inter get all the points. I can live with that. I mean, I have this little dream of Caprari and Bessa and Benassi playing for Inter in 2020. So it's not just Americans who are hoping for 2020 to come soon. Some of us are for different reasons. Right. I'd like to thank Gab Marcotti and Richard Hall and also Alex Donno.
Thank you.
And you will.
Thank you, everyone. Good evening. Enjoy your week.
Enjoy your week. And until next week, my name is Nima Ruzzari, wishing you all a good week. 3 points, and sempre e solo forza Inter.